One of the first things I did outside of school that didn't involve me leading it and sort of being mentored was with a project called Fina Final, which was a leadership project and climate activist workshop mentorship program. We did tree plantings and cleanups, and it was a great opportunity to sort of go outside of the environment I was living in, which was in the Apia area, and actually going out into the other parts of Samoa where we have natural reserves and looking at the coastal impacts that climate change is having, or the coastal effects from climate change, and sort of seeing it at a different perspective. And then we were also able to go to Pango, which is in American Samoa, to see how it's similar. So that's some of the things we've done.
And how is Samoa particularly affected by climate change?
Samoa is very at risk of climate change. However, it's not as impacted as other Pacific islands that are atolls, such as the nearby Tokelau, which is a very small atoll, and the effects of climate change are very, very severe there. But that doesn't mean that the effects of climate change in Samoa aren't as bad, because they are very severe, and I've seen how it's changed over time. When I was younger, the beaches I used to visit, the sea level, I can tell, has changed over the past, I would say, 15 years, from the time I can remember. When I went and visited the beaches I used to go to as a young child, they now look very different, and lots of the trees that used to be higher up on the coastline have now become more eroded, and you can see the roots of them now because the sand is being eroded from sea level rise. And then the same with the issues we have with biodiversity loss. So we have a very endangered animal, a bird that is unique to Samoa, called the manumea, and this has become increasingly rare, and it hasn't been sighted for a good few years now. And there's lots of conservation efforts that go into protecting the manumea, but the loss of that biodiversity is becoming more prevalent. And then, as many other countries have noticed as well, particularly Europe in the past summer, the temperature is increasing. And so in Samoa, you can just see how the weather is changing, because typically we have two seasons, the dry and the wet season. And when I was last in Samoa, which was in July, it was supposed to be the dry season, but the weather was so unpredictable, and there was rain every single day. And growing up, that never happened, because during the July period, it was always very dry and we didn't have enough water. And that extreme contrast just shows how serious climate change is becoming. And then also much more frequent natural disasters such as cyclones. And this isn't just Samoa, this is countries all across the Pacific. So like Vanuatu, for example, has experienced a huge amount of cyclones in the past. And so just the frequency increasing just shows how much the climate is changing. And then also coral bleaching, which is a huge issue in Samoa. When I go kayaking and looking at the coral, they're all now bleached and dead, and that's having a huge effect on our coastlines as well, but also the ecosystems within our oceans that are now like becoming less diverse, and lots of different fish having to migrate to cooler waters.
Do you think the work that has been done at the community level is enough?
I think we have a lot of activism that goes on within Samoa that is really making a difference. But I think we need help from the bigger countries across the world, and the governments, the ones that are polluting the most and creating the biggest carbon footprints, that need to actually recognize that we are trying to do our part in reducing the impacts of climate change. However, due to our small size, the work that we do doesn't make enough of an impact on the climate as a whole globe to reverse the impacts that climate change is having on our country. And so I think it's more the international recognition of the work we are trying to do, and the calls that we're trying to have heard by bigger countries to be recognized and listened to, rather than just Samoa being seen as a small island in the Pacific, because they often look at the Pacific as an ocean rather than a community.
Why do you think children are particularly affected by the environmental disaster in your community?
Because we're the future. As the elders start to pass away and we become the upcoming generation, which is inevitable, we are going to have to be the ones to face these issues of climate change. And even though they say, oh, this won't be an issue that we will have to solve until 2050 or 2030, by that point, we won't be the young people anymore, and we will be the leaders, the scientists, the politicians that will have to come up with solutions to try and reverse the problems created by the people that came before us. And so in order for us to avoid having to come to that point where we can't reverse it, we need adults now to be listening to what we have to say, because one day we're going to be the ones running this world, and we want to be living in a world where it's safe and clean, and that we have confidence that we will be able to survive as a human race.
Do you think children today can actually make a difference?
Yes, I think we can, because I believe that the power comes from the youth. And children today are trying to make a difference. We are trying to have our voices heard. We're trying to be in discussions that are making these huge decisions on these global issues. But there's so many restrictions put in place that prevent us from making as much of an impact as we could, such as the rule on voting ages. You know, we can't vote until we're 18. And so until then, politicians will generally not listen to us, not hear what we have to say, because we're not the population that they're trying to appeal to. And so I think that's one of the major issues within children's voices being heard, is that we don't have a voice in the political aspect, which is where the global and like the most significant decisions are being made about our environment, about the world around us.
I have asked all my questions. Is there anything you would like to add?
Every single country in the world is a part of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, except the United States. And so that means that pretty much majority of the world has to comply with the regulations that the committee puts out. And so with them putting an official general comment outlining children's rights to a healthy environment, it will enforce sort of these governments to recognize that not having a healthy environment is compromising the future of young people, and therefore encourage them to take action into protecting the environment before it's too late. And I also think that the resources that is also created, such as the charter, are creating young people to also have an understanding of how general comment is helping and protecting their future, because often when these global decision-making methods are being done, the young people across the world will not be able to understand it, or not have a proper comprehension of how it's going to benefit them and their future. And so I think that the resources, the toolkits, and everything that has gone into making general comment as big as it is going to make a huge difference.